So today we're very glad to welcome Professor Wilson Poon, who's the Professor of Condensed Matter Physics at Edinburgh. Actually, he did his PhD originally here in Cambridge, and he was also a research fellow here at St Edmunds. So we're delighted to have two seminar speakers 2 times running, who both, of course, have very close links to the college here. Professor Poon specialises, and I quote, in studying well-characterised model colloids to throw light on generic issues in condensed matter and statistical physics. He's not going to be talking specifically on that today, so perhaps to some people's relief here, but he will answer questions and then afterwards. But Professor Poon, of course, is also very widely involved in the science-religion debate and discussion, has written a lot on this. He's also on various other things which bring him into contact with doctrine, Christian doctrine. He's on the doctrine committee of the Scottish Episcopal Church, so a person of wide interests and involvements. And so we're very pleased that today he's going to speak to us on science and the hiddenness of God. Thank you, Professor Poon.
Thank you very much. No, I think you should leave the clapping to afterwards. If you still want to do it at the end, you can do that. Thanks very much, Dennis, for inviting me. I'm nervous talking about this because I'm using this as a chance to put together a lot of thoughts that I've never tried to put together before. Indeed, last night when I woke up at 3 trying to finish it, some of the thoughts surprised even me. So treat this as work in progress, and please, do let me know at the end whether you think any of it is at all convincing. Can I just have a feel? Who in the audience has a scientific background or is doing science? Quite a lot. Which one of you would say you're coming from a broadly Christian perspective in this? Okay, so that's not dissimilar to what I had expected. I mean, you all turn out to be militant atheists. I switched to the other topic, which would be called Hiddenness of God in Science. Slightly. So I've added a subtitle, which is it's very nice to organise found me a stick, because I hate laser pointers. So I don't know how much effort Polly has to go to find a stick, but thank you for that. So I added a subtitle, which is Towards a Pastoral Theology of Science. The towards I already explained. This is very much a forward look on work in progress in my mind. But I always have difficulty with the science and religion debate or dialogue with the and. I don't like it because, I mean, for me, my religious belief is the is the framework under which I do everything. Science is one of the things that I do. So for me, my religious faith is more like the operating system of a computer. It's that without which I can't do anything at all. So the kind of and is problematic. So I would like to talk about theology of science. So in other words, how do we God talk about science? How do we think theologically about science? I added adjective pastoral because this is largely a personal statement. I find it as a religious believer, as a Christian, the kind of communities I belong to, the sort of churches that I go to, the sort of groups that I belong to, actually offers very little supporting me as someone as a Christian with a vocation in science. And I've struggled for 20 years over this, and this is where I've arrived at the moment. And I'm hoping that this is, apart from being a personal statement, might help in thinking about how the church might respond to scientific bums on pews. Okay, so I mean, let me start my talk and my personal journey there. I mean, I'm a physicist, so the first time I came to Cambridge for my interview, I went there, had a photo taken of me there. There's no me there because it's hiddenness. I was very disappointed when I eventually discovered that I won't have my labs there. They now moved to this modern thing now, which went away that way down there. But on top of those doors, oak doors, I carved these words. My Latin is rubbish, so I won't try to pronounce it. But in the King James Bible that Maxwell would have known, it says that it works in the Lord at break, sort out of all them the pleasure therein. Now, this clearly is Maxwell's considered public statement on science and faith. It's a surprise because he's a very private man. He once said everyone should keep their views on science and religion to themselves. When he was asked to join the Victoria Institute, he says, no thanks, these things should not be discussed in public. So, this is a very public statement. So that clearly is very close to your own self-understanding. Very close to my self-understanding when I started my scientific training and my own Christian pilgrimage in the early 80s. And another verse he could have used, I don't think he used this because he wanted to very stress the active involvement of people. seeking out. But another verse he could have used is the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament showed his handiwork. I took it out of the King James Version again, the version that Maxwell would have known. And of course, this verse features very, very strongly in the self-understanding of countless number of scientist believers. I mean, here's a random example, something you can find on the web. When you type that verse in, you've got to get past 150 pages on creationist literature, and then you get to some other stuff. But some other stuff that you get to include, for example, John Horton, many of you will know, ex-head of the Met Office, very distinguished atmospheric physicist. He is now president of the John Ray Initiative. He recently wrote something called Big Science, Big God. And in it, he quotes this verse, and then quotes with approval the exposition of the Victorian preacher Spurgeon. Creation shouts, gossips, and exclaims, glory of God in wordless revelation. So in other words, to John Horton, as to Spurgeon, signs mediate a strong sense of the presence of God. John Horton goes on to quote Romans 1:20. Since the creation of the world, his eternal power and divine nature, invisible though they are, have been understood and seen through the things he has made, so they are without excuse. So John's comment is that Paul's assertion is even more true today than in the first century, because we know so much more about creation and its wonders. This view is not new. You can go back to the 4th century, to Basil of Caesarea, to his sermons on the 7 days of creation. When he was expounding that verse, he took a little detour into trying to figure out why doesn't the earth being heavy keep on falling. That was a relevant scientific question in those days. I wonder if you ask final year physics undergraduates that question now, whether they would hash it or not. It's interesting experiment. Think about it. Okay, so he went on and gave the standard world picture. I'll come back to that, Earth in the center and everything else, and he expounded, according to 4th century natural philosophy, why that may be the case, that the Earth would not keep on falling. I won't bore you with the details, but at the end of that, which is a scientific exposition in the middle of a sermon, he said, if there's anything in this system which might appear probable to you, keep your admiration for the source of such perfect order, the wisdom of God. Grand phenomena do not strike us the less when we have discovered something of the wonderful mechanism. In other words, the heavens declare the glory of God, especially when you thought about it through science. Poets think the same, jump to almost the present, Gerard Manley Hopkins, the world is charged with the grandeur of God, it will flame out like the shining choke foil being, take a look at aluminium foil, it's shimmering in the light. So, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament shows his handiwork. So in other words, according to everybody from Basil through Gerard Manley Hopkins, through Maxwell, through John Horton, and through countless number of people I've talked to, including myself, when I started in this journey, the scientific study of the universe mediates the presence of God. However, there's a problem. It's a wonderful PowerPoint. For every John Horton, there's a Stephen Weinberg. The more the universe seems comprehensible, the more it also seems pointless. So in other words, for a very large number of people, like Stephen Weinberg, scientific study of the universe, far from mediating a sense of the presence of God, in fact mediates his absence. And I think Thomas Hardy puts it extremely well. So here's a poem that he wrote called Cathedral Facade. We don't know when he wrote it, I'll give you a guess in a moment, but published in 1925. So he's talking about Salisbury Cathedral. Along the sculpture of the western wall I watched, the moonlight creeping. It moved as if it hardly moved at all, inch by inch, thinly peeping, round on the pious figures of freestone, brought and poised there when the universe was wrought to serve the centre, Earth, in mankind's thought. This is pre-Copernican science. Lunar looks skimmed scantily, toe, breast, arms, creeping up the statues, and edged on slowly, slightly to shoulder, hand, face. To each austere form was blanched its whole length brightly, a prophet, king, queen, cardinal, and state. At their men's twos strewn to simulate, and the stiff images stood irradiate. So this is the key verse, that's key stanza. So for a moment from the martyr's sayings there set mid others of the erection, against the breeze, seemed signs of regrets of the ancient faith's rejection, under the sure, unhasting, steady stress of reason's movement, making meaningless the code of creeds of old-time godliness. Here's a timeline. That's when Hardy was born. When he was born, Herschel's catalogue, definitive catalogue of 5,000 nebulae, was only 20 years old. That's a kind of definitive statement of the vastness of the universe in tabular form. Within 20 years, 1959, The Origins of Species was published. By the time he was in his 80s, he has bought, and his biography says, discussed copiously with his wife in bed. Really second wife. Einstein's books on relativity. So there's no doubt that when he talked about here the sure, unhasting, steady stress of reasoned movement, that reason referred particularly to scientific reason. I mean, you can read other of his poems when he makes it very clear. And he also gives you a clue here. So he's referring to a time when the universe model is pre-Copernican, and it's the steady movement from there through all of this that is making him think that the ancient faith is rejected and the old-time creed become meaningless. I mean, you can look. I'm talking about how people feel here, and I mean, you can tell how much change he has lived through by thinking about his word irradiate. I mean, when he wrote it in 1809, or we think he wrote this in 1809, this is sorcery. Those things were happening. Röntgen discovering X-rays, Becquerel discovering radioactivity, Curie using the phrase radioactive substance for the first time. The OED gave the first use of irradiate in a modern sense, interestingly of a tumour, in 1901. So in other words, when he wrote it, that word didn't have any of those meanings. By the time he published it, it would be very, very difficult for anybody reading this poem without hearing those resonances. Now, what I'm trying to give you is, I think Hardy here, in a more poetic and more dramatic way than Weinberg, nevertheless tells you that a lot of people feel deeply that science mediates a sense of absence, not presence. So there's a problem. Some people read the universe and just find God's presence. Some people in the red corner, on the other hand, read the universe as read God's absence. I've drawn them bigger because that's clearly the majority of reports. You count numbers. Now, if you take Basil's approach, if you take John Horton's approach, you go directly from the universe to God's presence, that's fine. There's plenty of biblical support for that. I've given you some. But what I want to explore is, suppose we don't take that. Suppose we take Hardy, Weinberg, various other people we've met. Suppose we take their feeling of the sense of God's absence from the scientific study of the universe seriously. Suppose we take that utterly seriously. Suppose we listen to them and think through it. And then eventually, arriving back there, would we, in the words of T.S. Eliot, learn something? Would we, by going this route of our exploration, arrive back there, learn something new about which God is present, how? Obviously, I think the answer is yes. Otherwise, I can sit down and do something else. So, my suggestion is that revisiting this sense of presence after sustained detour by absence would pay rich theological dividends and pastoral dividends as well. So, first of all, why does and how does science mediate absence? I think it does it in three ways, and I'm going to go through this in some detail because I want to give a good feel for what's changed. A lot of the story is known, and probably known to you. Okay, so I mean, here's a classical medieval world picture that's basically stable from Aristotle to Francis Bacon and beyond. Okay, so the Earth is in the middle. There's these crystalline spheres with the moon, with the stars, and the moon, the sun, and the stars outside. The Christian world added an extra bit on the outside called the Empyrean, which is where the souls of the blessed dead reside with God. In the sublunary sphere is the Earth, and above it. Okay, so this is the region of change and imperfection. Things change, demonstrably change on Earth, and demonstrably are imperfect. Up there, things move in perfect circles. Things are changeless. It's a perfect realm. And that's the realm where the souls of the blessed dead reside. This is an important dividing line. You know, this is sort of us. Everything is change and imperfection here. Up there, change and perfection. But this is the standard model. This is a stable standard model for more than a millennium. Now, why am I telling you about that? Because when men and women, under that model, look at the heavens, what do they see? When they look at the heavens, sorry, let me show you that. When they look at the heavens, they see perfection. When you go out at night, you look at heaven, what you think you are seeing is a realm of perfection. The heavens is heaven. And here's an example. This is a vision that Augustine had talking to his mother just before she died. So we're conversing most pleasantly with deeper emotion. We try to lift our thoughts into reality itself, covering step by step all things bodily and heaven itself, whence sun, moon, and stars shine above the earth, We soar higher and higher, and by the heart's meditation, by speech, by wonder at your work, penetrated to our naked minds and passed them to reach the place where plenty never fails. So in other words, in his vision, he's going through the stacks of crystalline spheres to reach the perfection, the realm of God, up there. That's really what men and women think they saw when they go and look up. So in other words, physical ascent through the heavens corresponds strongly to the spiritual ascent to God, when there are only two standard medieval spatial metaphors for the spiritual journey, upwards and inwards. We can talk about inwards later, on another occasion. But the upward journey of the soul to God corresponds strongly, is strongly identical to physical ascent upwards. So as I said, when men and women looked at the heavens, they almost literally saw heaven. We have to age. So, just show you Greek. Theoretical physics, theoria physicae, contemplation of nature leads to doxa theou, leads to glory of God. So, theoretical physics, contemplation of nature, directly leads to the glory of God. Moreover, if you feel you're surrounded by heaven, it's not difficult to believe in createdness, a sense that we are created, and then God shows providential care. I mean, here's just one example amongst very, very many. My family and I visited Lincoln before I came down here, which is where Robert Grostheste was bishop, and he is a very important figure in Middle Ages natural philosophy. Moving to the skies is only for the generation of man. So in other words, the only reason why those crystallline spheres turn around is to make conditions on Earth stable enough so that we can have babies. And why do we have babies? So that the number of the elect eventually can be fulfilled. Everything happens, absolutely everything happens, for the benefit of men and women on Earth. Probably, in fact, only men in those days. But anyway, you're enveloped by perfection, you're enveloped by heaven, and God takes care of us on Earth. But that changed, and that all changed in a very, very short time. Look, so this is the medieval world model. 1572, Tycho Brahe figured out that the orbit of comets took them from very far from the moon to very near the Earth to away again. That completely shattered everything. These are supposed to be impenetrable crystalline spheres. You can hear the glass break when it did his comet. And that just one go. I mean, people say Copernicus is the thing that changed everything. I think Tycho Brahe changed everything. When he showed that comet orbits go like that, he's had it. And then he discovered a nova, a new star. The heavens changed. The star wasn't there before. Kepler discovered another one, so it wasn't a fluke. And then Kepler showed that those orbits are not perfect circles, but the ellipses. Who ordered those? And then, Galileo finished the lot. In fact, he's discovered the moons of Jupiter and said, well, perhaps actually the Earth goes round the Sun. But the world picture is completely shattered into space of about the first half of Hardy's lifetime. So the point is, after that lot, when we go out and gaze at the sky, everything changed. We no longer see heaven when we look at the heavens. I mean, if I another whole seminar, I'll take you through John Donne's poetry. You find that he struggled, he absolutely struggled in his poems. So what the heck is going on here? The night sky changed. When you go out, you look up, he doesn't see the same thing again. Panic. So if you like John Donne, now go and read him again, you read him with completely new eyes, and you realise that. He deals with that in the most unlikely places in his poems. Not only is this world picture shattered, purpose is lost. I mean, Hardy referred to it in Cathedral Facade, when the universe was brought to surface centre, Earth in mankind's thoughts. So in other words, in the old world picture, the universe there for the purpose of men and women on Earth. This is providence. But no longer. I mean, again, one could give a whole seminar on that, but let me point out to you, the microscope had a surprisingly important role to play in that, and it played in, for me, a surprising way. This is Hooke's microscope in his micrography in 1664. In it, amongst other things, he showed a famous picture of the cells in cork, but he also showed a flea. And that flea, at least metaphorically, reappeared a little later in Goethe's, one of Goethe's first novels. That chap. Nice match. So this is the sufferings of young Werther's, 1774, so about 100 years later. Just see what he says. There's not a moment of praise upon you and upon all around you, not a moment in which you do not yourself become a destroyer. The most innocent walk deprives of thousands of poor insects. One step destroys the fabric of the industrious ants and converts it into the world into chaos. No, it's not the great calamities of the world, the floods which sweep away whole villages, the earthquakes which swallow up towns. Absolutely no doubt he was referring to the Lisbon earthquake. That effectively my heart is wasted by the thought of the destructive power which lies concealed in every part of the universal nature. So in other words, the moment you discover this microcosm in the world, man just become part of wanton destructive nature. Wanton destructive nature destroying man. Man walk on every step destroys thousands of those. What's the difference? I mean, can you feel? I just want to help all of us to feel that sense of change. Something really changed in the way men and women feel about the universe. Of course, he finished the job. I don't need to tell you that. So these only add to the sense of either that at least. So before that, humans felt at home in the universe. We're the universe created for our benefit. Now we become one rich among many in the universe is at best indifferent to our fate, and at worst downright cruel. I'll let you look at it. I won't read it out again. But this is another of Hardy's poems that if you like, tell you this sense of loss particularly powerfully. Let me just show you some key bits. So it says, whichever way you look at it, purpose is lost. I'm not going to try to recite it. Monty Python. The sublime to the sublime. You really can sing this to All Things Bright and Beautiful. And I'll show you later that this is not nearly as irreverent as it seems. Don't try to sing it now. You can just type Monty Python, All Things Ugly, and it won't be fine. And then it goes right through. So, again, the microscope, the destruction of nature, the nastiness, the evolution sun type show. And this loss of sense of purpose goes all the way to the modern day. Jacques Monod, Weinberg, those are well-known statements. And the universe is pointless. Last man is alone in the unfeeling immensity of the universe. These are deeply felt emotions. Okay, so the shattering of that world picture changed everything. You no longer see and feel the same way about the universe. But the second thing that changed, with coming on modern science, is from that change from that theoria physicae, contemplation of nature, to knowing by contemplation to knowing by construction. This is a quote from Amos Funkenstein, whose very famous book, Theology and Scientific Imagination of the Middle Ages to the 17th century. He very powerfully showed us what changed. It's one of my source books. This new idea, somewhat elusive yet powerful down to our own days, this idea of knowing through doing or knowing by construction. Francis Bacon believed that to discover a form is the same as being able to produce the thing in question. This is the reason why science is power. So what what Funkenstein called this new idea is the idea of is the ergetic idea coming from the Greek word ergos, work, again, to do. The new ergetic idea of knowing stood squarely against the old contemplative idea, common to most ancient medieval epistemologies, was the receptive character. That word is important. Knowledge of truth is found, not constructed. Implicit or explicitly, most new scientists in the 17th century assumes constructive theory of knowledge. We only know for certain things that we have constructed ourselves. That's the key sentence. So in other words, from now on, you don't go and look at the heavens and contemplate heaven. This photo of this funny hat. Science, which is about understanding, now immediately get allied to technology in a new way that has never been before. Because the way you know is by construction. So for instance, being able to construct a car means that you really understand mechanics. Being able to reconstruct the tracks in the bubble chamber means you really understand the early universe. I believe that in those brief moments in the particle accelerator, you're making universes. We have a primordial we have a tin of candles primordial soup in our physics display kind of art. Danger, do not open. So being able to reconstruct DNA means that perhaps you understand life, maybe. Being able to reconstruct the brain, perhaps you understand mind. I mean, if you can do it, I mean, it's just when you go to the doctor, I hurt here when it hurts here. And you go, does it hurt? Oh! Well then, you have faith in the guy, because I think he understands, because he has produced it. Right? So this is the ergatic idea of knowledge. To be able to reconstruct what to construct means that you know. Now, that's dangerous stuff, because Vico, this is from Funkenstein again, insists that we only have such knowledge by constructing society. Only God knows nature and man and knows about doing it. So in other words, people wrong about that sort of time, said, well, if there's an ergatic idea of knowledge, if knowing by construction is real knowledge, then knowing the universe is hopeless. We can never do it. They didn't think they could make primordial soup in a particle accelerator. But we can understand society, because society is entirely human construct, and therefore leads to people like Hobbes trying to make a science of society, because after we make society, so we should jolly be able to understand it. But you can see how dangerous that is, because the moment you can make primordial soup in the particle accelerator, then there's something that's problematic. The moment you really can reconstruct life, the moment you can reconstruct primordial soups, then you not only have the power to create mini universes, but you have power to reconstruct a diseased liver, etc., etc., etc. Knowledge leads to power, and that power displaces God. And this is another Thomas, R.S. Thomas. Not as in the old days I pray, God, my life is not what it was. Yours too accepts the presence of the machine. Once I would have asked, as it is keep it. Once I would have asked for healing. Once I would have asked healing. I now go to be doctored, to drink sinlessly the blood of my brother, to lend my flesh as manuscript with a great poem of the skull. This is after he himself has significant surgery, and he was cured. I can't remember what, but he was impressed that he was cured. He was Anglican. He was a Church of Wales priest. So I would have no long wrestling with you, swearing it now, hear my prayer, Lord, hear my prayer. As though you were deaf, mirrors and mortals have kept their shrill cry, explaining a silence by unfitness. There is a second half. But ergatic knowledge is to power, is to displacing God from all those realms of life in the past. All that you could do is pray. Now you go and get cut up. And you reconstruct it. And all is well again. That's the second thing. Shattering of that medieval worldview, world picture, where you see heaven in the heavens and sense the providential care of God, the ergatic idea of knowledge. The third thing is dispensing the God hypothesis. So when Simon de Laplace presented his celestial mechanics to Napoleon, the emperor apparently famously asked him, where is God among your equations? Because Napoleon didn't answer a word of this. But typically, when you're a book reviewer, you still have to say something intelligent, so you ask a question, but you know the author can't answer. Why is your dust jacket so ugly? So, where's God among the equations? So Napoleon looked through this and didn't see God anywhere. So, aha, got him. The context of it is very important. A generation ago, this chap, Newton, needed to appeal to God to explain why the solar system is stable. And why all the planets go in the same direction? Because God pushed in the same direction in the first place. The solar system is stable because God every now and then asked angels to give it a little push. It really is in Newton's books. I was too much in a hurry to find the references. But what Laplace did was that he showed that Newton just didn't know his own equations enough. He didn't have enough paper for doing calculations. But if you really do all the calculations, and you have a bigger computer, the longer calculations, you can explain all that. He was premature, he didn't know about chaos. But never mind. He thought he'd shown that you don't actually need any of that, you can dispense it with it. Now, Laplace was not an atheist. He remained a devout Catholic through his life. But he nevertheless said to Napoleon, son, I have no need of that hypothesis. Now, okay, so you said I do collars. This is one of the ways I do collars. I do theory. I mostly do experiments, but embarrassingly some of my most cited papers are theory papers, so there's this nasty rumor that I'm a theorist. I hereby say I'm not. But anyway, so here's a page, published paper. Don't try to read it. Now this is supposed to try to explain why colloidal particles in the presence of some polymer may aggregate. Now, the fact is, as a scientist, every day I go into the lab, I have blank pieces of paper on which I do my sums, engage in framing detailed mechanistic explanations of the working of the physical universe without having to resort to the God hypothesis. That is a fact. And it works. I mean, I don't get stuck halfway and say, oh, So I would claim that a powerful religious experience as a working scientist believer, which apparently many of you, is actually the palpable absence of God. I mean, you may know the cartoon. You may know the cartoon where two scientists covered the bottom of the equation. One of them wrote, and a miracle occurs here. Then you go next bit. And the other guy said, you may need a few more details here. I mean, the fact is, I don't need to do that. I never ever had to do that. No one has ever had to do that. And it really, really works. We all know that. It's a daily experience. And this fact that we can make real progress in seeking mechanistic understanding of the world without recourse to the God hypothesis, I claim is the most important macroscientific result of theology. Never mind multiverses, never mind how we fit quantum mechanics of God, never mind chaos theory, never mind evolution. That's the big one. And for science. But let me tell you how important I think it is. And Richard Feynman once said in his lectures, suppose all the scientific knowledge is wiped out, you're left with one sentence, what would you pass on? Anyone know what he said? Atoms. Right? The key sentence is all things made of atoms. I think that's true. I think the even more important thing to pass on is you really can't do science without God. The fact is, it took 2,000 years to figure that out. It took 200 years after that, less than 200 years to figure out atoms. That's a fact. So you really want to wipe out all scientific knowledge and help the next generation to rediscover science. That's what you're going to need to tell them. You don't need to bring in sphinxes and sun gods and what sort of thing. You don't need none of that. You really can do it without framing the theological hypothesis in science. It's that important. It took that long to figure out. So this macroscientific research is hard to stomach. Don't like it. I don't like it. And I doubt very much you like it. Because the official position is the heavens are going to glory of God. I was once asked to address a group of Islamic students. He asked me to give the Christian perspective, so I declined. I said I'd give you a Christian perspective. They were really annoyed. I said, I can't do that. If there is the Christian perspective, that come pretty close to the official position. If you just look into the web, if you talk to scientists, that's the official position. And so what happens? It keeps trying to sleep on begging. It's amazing how much people try to do it. Again and again, I do it, everybody else do it. Newton sleeping God was poking the planets of the solar system. Well, he was a clever chap, he did it. Maxwell did that. If you read his article on atoms in the 9th edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica, he says, the way I can explain why all atoms are identical is because God made them. His arguments were obscure. That's what he said. Bob Russell, very recently, says, aha, I know, in quantum mutation events, there's room for God to act. Room for God to act? What kind of a God is that? Intelligent design, bacterial flagella, we can't explain that with evolution, so it must be God. But it never worked. It never will. So, I spent quite a lot of time on that because I really want all of us to start from the same place for the next half. In other words, there's really a very strong sense of absence for scientists and non-scientists alike ever seen the medieval world picture was shattered. When we go out at night and look up the sky, we don't feel the same, we don't see the same things, we don't feel the same feelings, we just don't. So you say, well, what about Paul's words in Romans? They're without excuse. But you've got to read on. He says, idolatry is without excuse. He's talking in a cultural milieu where non-believing in God, the feeling of God's absence, is the minority. He says, God's greatness is so tremendously shown in the heavens that you're without excuse, you should not be worshipping the heavens. He's not speaking to a situation in which science mediates a very strong sense of God's absence for scientists and non-scientists. He's not speaking to that situation. He's talking about idolatry. So if you really want to deal with this, you can look elsewhere. So the rest of it, that bit I'm sure, because it's history. The next bit is hard. But that passage from Bonhoeffer's Letters and Papers in Prison, it's widely known and it's widely misinterpreted and it's widely important for me. So he said, God as a working hypothesis in morals, politics, and science has been surmounted and abolished. The same thing has happened in philosophy and religion. We cannot be honest unless we recognize that we have to live in the world, even if God were not given. And this is just what we do recognize before God. God himself compels us to recognize it. God would have us know that we must live as men and women who who manage our lives without him. The God who is with us is the God who forsakes us. The God who lets us live in the world without it, working out boxes of God, that's the last stuff, is the God before whom we stand continually. Before God and with God we live without God. God lets himself push out of the world onto the cross. He's weak and powerless in the world, and that's precisely the only way in which he is with us and helps us. Matthew 8:17 makes it quite clear that Christ helps us not by virtue of his omnipotence, but by virtue of his weakness and suffering. That's what Matthew quotes Isaiah 53. Let me give you some context. Immediately before that letter, he tells you what book he was reading. And if you read a recent article by Abraham Bethke, to whom Bonhoeffer addressed all of these letters, he made very clear that Bonhoeffer, in his head, when he wrote all that, is dialoguing with his scientist brother, Carl Friedrich Bonhoeffer, after whom the Max Planck Institute of Biophysics is named. He was an agnostic. There's no doubt that at the back of Bonhoeffer's mind when he wrote this, science loomed large, although he talked about all kinds of areas of human endeavor. Now, the key thing is, the Death of God theologians in the 60s love quoting this passage. They can't read English or German. Bonhoeffer is not talking about the death of God. Bonhoeffer is talking about the presence of the hidden God. You see the difference? That really is important. Absence is not the same as hidden presence. There really is a difference. Bonhoeffer is not saying God is absent. Bonhoeffer is saying God is present in an absent form. Before God and with God, before God and with God, those prepositions are important. We live without God. Let's see what we can make sense of that. Let's try to give a. I'm running out of time, but the Deus absconditus, the hidden God, in the overall shape of the biblical narrative, to show that I'm not making special pleading for science. I mean, okay, so in Genesis, God was walking around in the garden. He was telling people not to eat apples or whatever the fruit was. God was very present. By the time you get to Genesis 12, God only appeared. The Hebrew really apparently meant he was seen by. By Genesis 16, the story of Hagar, God only appeared as an angel. Exodus 20, the people actually pleaded for God not to be so real to them. Don't let God speak to us again. God never again spoke to the whole nation. Numbers 12 says, actually from now on I will speak to prophets through visions. Not like speaking most face-to-face with Moses, the face-to-face stuff is gone, I'm going to speak through visions. By Judges 6, Gideon was complaining about a lack of miracles. By 1 Kings 8, when Solomon has built a temple, this is very significant, a cloud filled the house of the Lord. The Lord appeared to Solomon the second time, and that apparently is the last time God appeared to anyone in the Old Testament. By 1 Kings 18, Elijah and the prophets of Baal, that was the last public spectacle miracle. After that, Elijah found God only in the sound of sheer silence. Elijah just won the contest of the prophets of Baal in the fire, but God was not in the fire, God was in the sheer silence. After that, the Lord said to Elijah, that was the last time God said anything to anyone. After that, it was only the word that the Lord came to. God never actively said anything. By the time you get to 2 Kings 19, that was the very last time the angel of the Lord did anything. After that, angels only appear in visions. It's Cheshire Cat. And by the time you get to the last book of the Old Testament, he has disappeared altogether. There's no mention of God in Esther. And yet no one who has followed the narrative this far can possibly read that narrative without feeling the hidden presence of God everywhere in the narrative. When Mordecai said to Esther, who knows, perhaps you have come to this royal dignity for just such a time as this. When Esther appeared in front of the king, despite taking the big risk of having her head chopped off, as soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favour. There's no doubt in C.S. Lewis's word in the Narnia Chronicles, you see the poor prince, the lion, everywhere. But there's no explicit mention of the lion. Richard Friedman's Disappearance of God is a very detailed study of the Old Testament from that perspective. Of course, when you get to the New Testament, what happened? All you left was a baby in a manger. But that is a pretty big Cheshire Cat effect. Mark 1:1, beginning with the Gospel of Jesus Christ, Son of God. Son of God disappeared until when? Until chapter 15. The Roman centurion stood facing Jesus, said, well, that's the centurion hiding there. So the place where both Jews and Greeks alike agree that when God was most absent, the cross, Jews think the man is cursed, Greeks think it's folly. According to Mark, that's the place where God is most singularly present. That's the place where the first person got it right. Not any of his miracles that Jesus did. Not any of the things that he said, but that. Now, where does it connect to science? This is the Jesus. This is the one that John called the Word. Word was what God used. This is a 15th century biblical manuscript in Mainz. That's the Word that created, is the agent of creation. All things were made through him, without him anything made that was made. Now, that one picture, I think, encompasses almost everything I want to say. If we really want to think through God and the sense of absence in the universe, and all you really need to start from and end from, and end with, is that the creative Word is present in the universe, on earth, with us, as crucified Christ. So I would claim to understand the presence of God in creation, right? And God is present. We have to understand the presence of God with us in Christ. Because otherwise, the God that you think you see the glory of is not the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, if you like. In the case of the heavens telling the glory of God, they need to be interpreted in the light of that verse in John's Gospel. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the earth and dies, it remains alone, but it dies and bears much fruit. It's in the same scriptures. By the way, it notes the poignant and striking reference to death in natural processes, but that's another subject. My claim is that in the science-religion dialogue, far, far too little attention has been paid to Jesus. So, work in progress. How do I use the fact that the creative Word that brought the heavens and earth into place, Genesis 1, is the same Word that in John's Gospel was glorified on a cross? Okay, let me give you some hints. These are only hints that I got myself last night at 12. When you look through what Jesus does, the Word gives voice to the voiceless. Sometimes explicitly, opening the mouths of the dumb. Sometimes by stopping people who want to silence those that they think should be voiceless. Sometimes by picking them out and giving them a voice. The woman could have remained silent. Jesus explicitly drew her out, said, tell us your story. Right through the Gospels, Jesus repeatedly gave voice to the voiceless. And remember, this is the Word. He's giving voice to the voiceless. Now think about it. That's Psalm 19, we started. There's only one trouble. There's no speech, nor are words, the voice is not heard. Yet the voices go out through all the earth, the words of the end of the world. I mean, how does the heavens declare the glory of God? I mean, to my mind, when I think through what I do, the scientists give voice to voiceless creation. And doing that, whether you are a believer or not, whether you know it or not, doing that is actually part of the image of God. When God first created the humans, he gave voice to humans by addressing them. He blessed them, he gave them the trees for fruit. The humans then can talk to God and respond. So giving voice to us is the original blessings of God from creation. And to my mind, giving voice to the voiceless, following from the example of Jesus, is what scientists do. And you don't have to believe it. See, I mean, this is a biography of Barbara McClintock, who got a Nobel Prize for discovering that genetic elements can move en masse between genomes. Over and over again, Barbara McClintock tells us that one must have the time to look, the patience to hear what the material has to say to you, openness to let it come to you above all one's feeling of the organs. So in other words, in order to give voice to the voiceless, you've got to attend. You've got to attend to all these bits of subhuman creation. And furthermore, scientists repeatedly direct our attention to those parts of the universe that are not deemed relevant to humans. If I had time, I would have gone through the book of Job with you, but I won't. But if you look at the end of Job, you find that Job pointedly pointed to, the God in Job pointed to a whole bunch of stuff that is actually not relevant to humans, including sea monsters. He directed your attention not to those bits of rain that falls on the ground where people live, but to rain that falls on the ground where no one lives. He directed you to sea monsters that no one had any use for. So somehow, the end of Job shows you what God wanted to direct Job's attention to is all those bits of the creation that are not human relevant. Now today, the world we would have talked about viruses and volcanoes. But typically, we scientists attend to these things. I mean, I've heard virologists talk lovingly about viruses that cause death, but they attended to them lovingly. Volcanologists do the same. I believe, in biblical terms, that's giving creation voice. And if you read the 6th century writer Hiddenness, in his book Celestial Hierarchies, he basically said the following. I can't find a reference, but it's there. He says, basically, anyone would agree that a beautiful sunset mediates the presence of God. But if you really believe that God made everything, you better learn to think about how to talk about the glory of God through all these other nasties. Hence the Monty Python. It's very easy to talk about the presence of God and the glory of God and the beautiful sunset. It's hard. But it is scientists who keep directly our attention. So when Jesus gave voice to the voiceless, they invariably go out praising God. And I believe that's beginning to approach some of the mysteries of Romans 8. Why is it that creation is only liberated when the children of God are liberated? That's because the creation needs giving voice to. But then the amazing thing in Mark is that Jesus, who gave voice to everyone, himself became voiceless. Okay? So his voice was widely misinterpreted in his trial. He might as well not say anything. He was silent, he made no answer. Jesus made no further answer, Pilate won. And the silence is palpable, although the word silent is not used when he was taunted. Made famous by Handel's music. Well, I hear a very deep resonance between those two things. I mean, we get that taunt all the time. You don't need to be Dawkins to taunt people like that. But I tell people what as I'm going to Cambridge to give a seminar, they ask you what you do, what are you give a seminar about, I tell them this, what you do. I'm going, waste of time. My suggestion is that let's not actually go too quickly to answer that question. Go too quickly to find places for God to inhabit. That's the gist of what Bonhoeffer had to say. Because it's in the Passion of the Voiceless One, the centurion discovered God's presence. So, if you like, that taunt is part of scientists, believers, filling up the sufferings of Christ, in Paul's words. Because Jesus was resurrected, wasn't he? Yes, but look at this painting in St. Mark's, Florence, by Father Angelico. We're in an empty tomb. Angel, apparently easy. He said, yeah, he's resurrected. But look at the perspective. The angel is pointing at the resurrected Christ whom the women can't see. It's behind them. What's the point of pointing at something you can't see? Looking down here. Who's the only one who can possibly see the risen Christ? It's the monk. He can see him. But the monk is in real time. This is a part of the curve of the architecture. The monk is in the real world, outside the picture. As he lived the life of faith in the world. So Bruno Latour has a great lecture of this picture. But I mean, the long ending of Mark is a fantastic verse. Go into the words of preach the gospel to the whole creation. What does that mean? So I claim that as scientists, when we give voice to voiceless and we share the suffering of his voicelessness, we would then discern his presence, but only that way. And this discernment doesn't come with birth. It is schooled in a community of word and sacrament. So very briefly, last comment. So if we learn to interpret the Bible, how the creative word is present in the written word, we also learn to discern the presence of the creative word in the other book of God, Book of Nature. I will not talk about this quote of George Steiner because we're running out of time. But then also the real presence of Christ, and we could have as many denominations here as you can get, we all interpret it differently. But nevertheless, there is a presence of God in Christ in the sacrament, and it doesn't get any realer than that. I believe part of this is schooled in the sacrament where we see that material cannot bear any more divinity than that. It's not that obvious, but the presence is real. So Oliver Davis' book is fantastic on that subject, on both of those subjects. So that's the other half of R.S. Thomas's poem. I'll put it back on. I'm going to show you this other one, but let me just leave the last word to Pascal. What meets our eyes denotes neither a total absence nor manifest presence of the divine, but the presence of God that conceals itself. Everything bears this stamp. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson, very much indeed. Well, I'm sure that stimulated plenty of questions. 9 minutes of questions, empty. I'm going to kick off maybe while you're thinking just with a fairly straightforward kind of historical question. I know John Hedley Brooke, the historian, has often pointed out that in the response to the Copernican change in cosmology, a number of people thought the planet had actually gone upmarket. It had sort of now become a planet rather than being the centre of the universe and therefore a sort of centre for refuse that was coming down. And actually it had, along with your presentation of that, it had also the effect of people thinking more highly of the Earth because it was now more highly up in the heavens. So do you want to reflect on that? Because I mean, the kind of responses that you, I think, mentioned to the Copernican revolution were not uniform by any means, were they? Were very diverse responses. And,
it's absolutely true.
So, yeah.
My point simply is that there are, for every one talk along this line, there are about 100 on the other line. It's absolutely true. That is the majority position, that's the official line. That's fine, there's truth in that, but we also need to hear the other voice. What you said is absolutely true.
Yes. Yes.
And if the nature does not point us to God, so how do we know that Christ is the Word of God?
The church was small c. I said this, the only way to my mind to rightly interpret the evidence, right, of nature, although that's a loaded word itself, if we don't know how to read the presence of God in the cross of Christ, I think we're sunk.
Yeah, but when we read the historical records about Jesus, about his life, his death, resurrections, if we do not have in our background knowledge the existence of God, then how does it how is it that the hypothesis that says that Jesus' resurrections is actually shows that he is God incarnate? How does it make that hypothesis plausible if we do not have in our background knowledge the existence of God?
The trouble is, the resurrection of Jesus shows that he's God incarnate was not the sort of knockdown proof that you make it out to be. It was perfectly possible to doubt in every single resurrection appearance narrative in the New Testament. Some doubted, some doubted, some doubted.
But if we are not looking for absolute knockdown proof, we are only looking for some inductive proof or inductive arguments that render the hypothesis probable as what we have in science.
Yeah, but I would claim that the most important discovery of science that you really can make sense of the universe without a God hypothesis. No one of you has ever published a scientific paper with, and here a miracle occurs, right? I'm assuming that's true.
Right. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
I come from an entirely arts background and also from an Orthodox Christian background. Declare my hand. I wonder, just listening to you, whether you aren't overstating the claims of science to understanding. From the non-scientific perspective, it looks very much like Superbia Intellectualis, claiming to understand by potentially replicating things which are still beyond comprehension. And I take my point from about the age of 8, I first heard we were on the brink of being able to replicate life. We were going to understand the origins of life so successfully that we'd be able to. Now, 60 years later, it hasn't happened. And the search for life in other planets, Fred Hoyle's theory that somehow the seeds of life were transmitted to us, looks increasingly like a desperate attempt by science to fill the gaps that it can't deal with.
Well, I mean, the two things. Say, one is the desperation seems much less to me because the ability of interstellar space to synthesize organic molecules seems to surprise chemists all the time. But anyway, I was very careful. I did not say, if you actually read all my statements, I checked them. I said it's perfectly possible to make mechanistic sense of the universe without a God hypothesis. I didn't say it's possible to make sense of the universe without a God hypothesis. Science has a restricted aim of offering mechanistic explanations of the universe, and that we are perfectly successful, and history is on my side. And every time when someone says, no, we can't do that, you wait. It's not a complete story, but it's the mechanistic part of the story.
Okay.
Yeah, it was very interesting. But on this God hypothesis, you seem to be claiming that it's science that has displaced the God hypothesis, the way science has developed. But I mean, I wonder would medieval theologians really have been that surprised at the development here? Because, I mean, a medieval theologian of the stature of Thomas Aquinas would have had a difficulty with the God hypothesis because the God hypothesis makes God part of the universe. And if God is part of the universe, then God is part of what has to be explained.
My claim is that in the medieval worldview, if you like, this statement from Basil, right, that one, makes sense. Because, you know, every night you go out, you look up in the sky, you see heaven, you feel everything has a createdness about it, and God is providential. So understanding anything about the mechanisms does not display that. I mean, yeah, Adelard of Bath, who was a very early English scientist, debated with his nephew upon coming back from Europe, one around place. You know, he says we should try to give explanation as far as we can go without invoking God. And we've been really stuck. Well, maybe. So, you know, no, they won't be surprised. But this is the world picture under which that approach took place. The moment that, in sociological terms, that plausibility structure goes, oh, that's different.
That's different from the theology.
Yes, so we can, yeah.
Yes.
I think the lesson from Bonhoeffer is not to look for a God of the gaps, which he certainly preempted Coulson by saying. And he saw that we were looking for gaps in science and a whole other host of disciplines. But the lesson is surely that we should seek God in what we know, rather than what we don't know. And therefore there's so much we actually do know of science, from science. Which, and if you look at this Psalm 19 too, it's the whole caboodle which is showing forth the glory of God, not the fact that there's some bit that we can't explain.
All I'm claiming is it would be only the exegesis half done if you don't explicate the word glory there using the way the Johannine writer uses the word glory. You only done half your exegesis. The fact is...
in the Old Testament, the glory of God in the heavens. I agree, of course, that the glory of God is displayed in the cross,
well,
ultimately.
in the Old Testament, in the order transference I have not used, you can look for the wisdom tradition. And there's a very strong line there. That developing line, this is especially made clear by R.E. Clements in one of his pieces on wisdom. That there's a very strong line developing that encourages you to look to the workings of nature and deduce something about the workings of society without reference to God. You just have to read a lot of the Proverbs and how to take over Egyptian Proverbs to see that. So, you know, even within the Old Testament, there are pointers to it. And again, you know, I haven't got time to do all that, but I'm perfectly prepared to state within the Old Testament framework, I'll show you, the Old Testament God disappeared like a changing cat. So, you know, the glory of which God? Oh, that you might rend the heavens and come down, that God? Oh, you're a God who hide yourself, that God? I mean, you know, so at least that strand is there. And it's so little discussed. I mean, everything that starts from Psalm 19, I have no wish to argue with, but my wish to argue is that the whole discussion is so lopsided on that side, we so quickly jump to that verse, that we're not listening to the absence minority report, at least in the Bible, and the majority report in our society, and possibly even among believing scientists.
Okay, yes.
Well, it's hardly possible to give justice to what you've done. I mean, but I think what you've done is a marvellous preface to what can be a new form of belief. But I just wonder, is it possible you could comment on the idea that perhaps when we will we find God in dark matter?
No more or less than we might find God in any other kind of matter.
Okay.
I mean, it's absolutely preposterous that people should ever think that only things that glow matter. But that's what it is. I mean, Landau said cosmologists are often wrong but seldom in doubt. You know, and you can say it about a lot of people, say it about me giving this talk. But I mean, the fact is, I mean, to me, dark matter is yet another. This micro-scientific result. It would be very infinitely interesting to talk through the implications of it, but it would not change the macro result.
Our time is up, and just two things to say in closing. One is that in 2 weeks' time we have Professor Barbara Dressel coming from the University of Darmstadt, who's going to be speaking on the theme of biological complexity. Again, another physicist who's come more in the direction of biology in some respects in our own research. So do come for that. And the second thing is just to thank Wilson very much for a very stimulating seminar, which I know has raised lots of interesting questions in our own minds. And so thank you very much, Wilson, indeed.